For many years, there were so few cases of syphilis, and it's one of those diseases that, for whatever reason, is on the rise again. There were almost 75,000 cases diagnosed last year in the U.S.
And I'm glad you said diagnosis. It can be very, very tough to diagnose. We were talking about it in back. We learned in medical school they called syphilis the great imposter. I mean, it can present in so many different ways. Every single organ system, obviously dermatology, but other organ systems, sometimes can be a tough diagnosis, especially where you're not thinking of syphilis.
Well, and here's the concern. When penicillin was discovered, syphilis all but disappeared because people were vigilant for it back then. Penicillin was very effective. Now there are some more resistant strains we have to be very concerned about. But the other thing about syphilis, since people aren't looking for it, not thinking about it, we talk about all these other sexually transmitted infections, and nowadays people think, well, you know, HIV is no big deal because it can be treated. This isn't any big deal because it can be treated. But syphilis, the issue with it is it progresses over time, and if it's not identified early and treated, it can create major problems. We have some pics here because the first stage, it may just be a painless sore. You might confuse it for an ingrown hair, a cut, or maybe a harmless bump near your genitals or even in your mouth. Now, the second stage presents with a non-itchy body rash on the palms and hands or all over the body, maybe your feet. Here's the concern, the final stage of syphilis, you may have no symptoms at all and you think you're fine, no treatment, but then all of a sudden you can develop things like permanent blindness over time, brain damage, even death. When I was in residency, I spent a month working in the VA hospital right next to Vanderbilt Hospital, and I had a vet who had tertiary syphilis. And let me tell you, I learned a lot about how much you do not want to get this disease. So sad, and by that point, your typical treatments of, say, simple penicillin, the damage is largely done.
They'll cure the disease from that point forward, but the damage and the destruction that's been done can't be reversed. So even though there is penicillin G, the problem is, number one, like you said, there are resistant strains now, which are very scary. Number two is there is a shortage of penicillin G right now in the United States, which is also, we think, contributing to the rise in these cases. And three, once you've destroyed the tissue, destroyed the nerves, then you can't undo that. You can just keep it from going forward.
And the nature of the way that disease progresses, the actual tissue reaction, it's hard for the medication to penetrate. Yes,
those tissues,
it's a walled type reaction. So for all those reasons, you know, there's so many other STDs that get more time in the talk shows, HPV and chlamydia and obviously herpes, but you know, that happens and we drop our guard against.
Yeah, I think we forget that these diseases can come back. These diseases that we thought we sort of had at bay and
gonorrhea as well.
Yeah, chlamydia.
Is it me, or are a lot of people largely blasé about these sexually transmitted diseases? Because again, there may be this thought process out there that, you know, none of these are that big of a deal. And again, a lot of it is because if you didn't grow up in the syphilis era, and you're one of the 75,000 Americans who's recently caught this, you're completely naive to how serious it can be. And I want this to be a wake-up call for everyone, and why it's so important to protect yourself, to know, you know, to know your partner, to have that awkward conversation, as awkward as it is, to, in an ideal world, the two of you together before you start a sexual relationship, talk about getting tested, because the truth is, so many of these diseases, you have no symptoms at all at first, and so you can pass it on to your partner. And women in particular are more susceptible. And
also really important to point out that this can be passed from mother to baby during pregnancy as well. So this is one of those diseases, especially if you're not aware that you have it, that can infect your baby and cause a number of true congenital problems.
And the other thing about syphilis is it's painless. So most people don't respond to even new lumps and bumps on their body, even in the genital area as an example, unless it hurts. It's like, oh, okay, what do you do when you get a bump? You press it. That's the automatic reaction, even as a doctor. First thing, like,
oh, it doesn't hurt.
I wonder what that is. You know, meanwhile, you're like, oh, I got that thing down there. And, you know, if you're out being sexually active, not only are you at risk, but then your partner's at risk. And with these now, again, these new strains that are more difficult to treat, resistant to antibiotics, I think it's a time to re-familiarize yourself with
your partners.
and
get tested and wear a condom.